Welcome, everybody. August is Anti-Terrorism Awareness Month because the Army says it is. The truth of the matter is every day needs to be Anti-Terrorism Awareness Month. Why? Because unlike in the States, there's a lot bigger threat here than there, okay? As I say in my AT Level 1 brief, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. There are more dangerous people here, there are more of them, and they've had about 40 years worth of practice, so they're pretty good at it. There are two extremes here. Okay? Extreme number one being that we walk around shaking in our boots telling people, oh my God, an attack is imminent. Number two, yeah, right, whatever the old guy says. And we pay no attention to it. There are bad people in Italy. When we get to the numbers that our speaker is going to share with you in a moment, you'll probably be startled, but they're true, okay? I'm glad you're here. You're going to learn a lot. Unlike one gentleman that I spoke to and invited him here, and he said, well, it's hard for me to listen to anybody on anything terrorism related because I have a master's degree in terrorism. I don't know what esteemed university or online program he took, but okay. Our speaker today, who I've known many years, and by the way, real quickly, I'm introducing myself. I'm Jesse Markham. I'm one of two of the anti-terrorism officers here for the post. I work over here at the garrison for Colonel Minist and Mr. Leisinger and Mr. Griggs, folks over there, okay? So we take your security and your safety very seriously at the anti-terrorism part of the garrison, okay? I'm an old knuckle dragger from way back, spent my time in Ranger units, 2nd Bat, then I was a Ranger instructor for a while, and spent forever, I think, 11 years at Fort Bragg, a lot of it at SWIC, so that's kind of a little bit about my background. I met our guest speaker in 1993, and in 1993, young men, I too, like you, was young, okay? I was young once, and so was he. And we got a new group of soldiers in. I was a squad leader, E6 at the time, and my platoon sergeant sent me down. He said, go get us one. And so if you can't tell from twang being from Oklahoma, I know a little bit about horse sales, and that's about what it looked like. They were running around the little room there, doing everything but pawing and whinnying at each other. And I saw Specialist Bradley. That's all I knew, rank and name. Big, all swole up. Come to find out he was an offensive lineman in college. And I said, I'll take the large one there. And it turned out to be a pretty good choice. He's the best in lower enlisted I ever had, and I've worked with some very good ones. He made E6. Of course, he went to Ranger School long before that. Went on to OCS, went to Special Forces. And if you've read anything on his the posters and stuff out here, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 8 trips to Afghanistan. And no matter how hard-headed you might be, you're going to learn something in 8 tries. So unlike our man with the degree, Mr. Bradley, recently Special Forces Major, just retired Mr. Bradley, does not have a sheepskin on the wall. But what he does have is an enormous wealth of information learned where the metal meets the meat and the rubber meets the road. He knows a little bit about it. So you're really fortunate to get a chance to hear some things he's got to say about terrorism in general, about the fact that we have an AT program here. There's a reason for it, besides the fact that you got to have it, and that every day, not just the month of August, should be Anti-Terrorism Awareness Month. Some things to look for to protect you, yours, and your safety while you're here. In an age where there is no shortage of heroes, since 9/11, Rusty Bradley qualifies many times over. We're really honored to have him here. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Special Forces Major, just retired, my friend, Mr. Rusty Bradley. Rusty. Long way up here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the rest of the bad long way. Thank you, Mr. Markham. You know, you're starting to get old when you have to wear your... You guys still call these pregnancy prevention glasses? Because if you're wearing them, there's absolutely no way you're going to Your wife's not going to adore you when you're wearing them. First off, let me thank you guys for what you do. That's not only the green suiters, but also the civilians that support them, the wives that love them, the kids who think you're a hero every day when you come home. Doesn't matter what you do, where you go, what your job is. It matters. In a world that's very selfish and superficial, what you guys do matters. And if nobody else tells you, thank you, because you got a big rucksack to carry. We use words like radical, extremist, terrorist. These kind of words immediately grab your attention, and it should. The brief today that I'm going to give you is just a small synopsis of some experiences in Afghanistan with a focus on Islamic terrorism. Many people talk about how much they know, especially academics, about terrorism. But really, it's nothing more than a dangerous ideology fueled by religious hatred. Obviously, my task here today is simply to provide you some insight, a little bit of information, maybe a few nuggets of information on firsthand experiences that I've had over the last 11 years in and out of Afghanistan. Now, how many of you guys have deployed? Mostly to Afghanistan or Iraq and Afghanistan? Okay. Most civilians ever get the opportunity to experience anything to do with terrorism or ever see a jihadist is on a TV screen. Unfortunately, I've spent the last 11 years confronting this enemy, and I'm going to take some of the tactics, techniques, and TTPs that I learned, and we're going to try to apply them here today. And that's kind of difficult because we're taking a model from a kinetic theater of war and trying to place it into a civilian non-kinetic theater. It's going to require a little bit of brief history on a geographic region. We're going to take a look a little bit at the operational model that terrorist organizations use. But really what we're trying to do is not only educate you, or if you've been there and you know some of this information, refresh you to maintain your focus on terrorism. Now, Europe has a very interesting history of dealing with terrorism. Unfortunately, the way that they conduct themselves sometimes, they seem to be quick to forget. Installations like this are high on the insurgents' priority list. Not just because it's a U.S. military installation, but because of the large number of civilians that frequent through here, both foreign national and U.S. Terrorism's nothing new to Italy. How many of you guys know, or in the audience, how many of you know that Italy has a pretty rough history of terrorism? Between about the 1960s and the 1980s, it's what the Europeans or the Italians call the years of lead. There were a tremendous amount of assassinations, terrorist bombings, kidnappings. There's 5 common groups, role players, that fit into this historical model. Does anybody have an idea of, just take a stab at it, who are some of them? The Red Brigades are one. Yes, sir. Obviously, you had the communists. The mafioso, organized crime. Very good. That's 3. You got power mongers, wealthy industrialists who are fighting for power. You also have anarchists. What we found is that research has shown that there is actually a connection in some way, shape, or form to each one of these groups between either multiple groups or amongst all of them. What we typically don't realize is that the sixth and most dangerous is Islamic terrorism, and it's very prevalent here in Italy, as we're going to tell you. Now, most of these groups are focused on political and internal affairs within the country. Islamic extremists are not focused on the politics of the country. What they're essentially focused on is the ideological and religious separation and conquer, the establishment of the caliphate. We realize that after we take a look at the history, even the recent history, Islamic extremism is really right at our doorstep. In May of 2002, you had the execution of a nuclear power plant engineer in Brindisi. You had a bombing that killed a pupil in Genoa. As recently as April of last year, police in Bari exposed a terror cell that was planning international terrorism. They were recruiting and training suicide bombers. After a tremendous amount of intelligence collection, phone tapping, email surveillance, the ROS, the Special Task Brigade for the Italian government, managed to capture this six-man cell. All the members were natives of Tunisia and Morocco. So there was no political connection whatsoever to any of the other insurgent groups. It was all religious and ideological. So what makes Italy a viable target? Give me an idea of what you think. Why is Italy a target? Let's just throw it out there for open discussion. Bingo, spot on. That's exactly what it is. You know, while Italian officials have done an excellent job of deterring terrorism, the fact remains that immigration in any country, anywhere in the world, can't be completely controlled. Illegal immigration is the primary means of insurgent infiltration across the globe. The only other means is homegrown terrorism. What is hard for us to digest, and the shock value comes from understanding that terrorists are here. They are among you, and you don't typically know it. You're not supposed to. For example, in the United States alone, last year, over 200 OTMs, which are classified other than Mexicans. On the southern border, it's either Mexicans as illegal immigrants or OTMs as other than Mexicans. 200 Somalis were captured at random checkpoints and conducting ground infiltration into the United States who had direct ties to Al-Shabaab, which is just in the United States alone. What's really scary is those are the only ones that they captured. How many got across the border before they were captured? Italy is absolutely the primary transit and throughway point to Syria, Dubai, the vast majority of the Middle East. The high tourism here allows for easy access and mobility throughout the country, as well as diversity. You have an extremely diverse population. You go to the mall, you go to a bar, you go anywhere in this country, and there's tons of tourists. It's very easy to blend in here. But Italy's diverse population and U.S. military presence as a prime transit point make it a significant target. Now, what's the scope of the threat? How big is it? What percentage of the Islamic world supports extremist terrorism? Let's look at this from macro to micro. Somebody give me an idea of how many Muslims you think there are in the entire world. Shoot. Did you read it? Well done. That's actually spot on. Conservative estimates are between 1.1 and 1.3 billion Muslims in the world. Now, before we go down this road, let's go ahead and throw out the caveat. We cannot stereotype any particular people, culture, or religion. I will tell you in no uncertain terms that I have served with multiple Muslims in the special operations community. The Muslim people in general are very peace-loving people. They are on the right side of humanity, and they have a tremendous amount to offer us historically, culturally. But the side of extremist Islam that we don't see, this is the side that is almost incomprehensible for the Western mindset. So if we look at this through a global scale, and let's take that 1.1 billion, on average, the FBI uses something called the chronic 5%, meaning that any population has an average 5% that are extremely violent. If we take that 1.1 billion and do the math, we're looking at over 50 million terrorists, extremists in the world globally. Now, according to Daniel Pipes, who's the director of the Middle East Forum, it's a Muslim media outlet, he says that between 10 to 15% of the entire population, Muslim population of the world, either directly participates or supports extremist Islam. Now that's a significant change. Now we're talking about almost half of the population of the United States of America. So between 50 and 150 million, 170 million people are either involved in the insurgency itself, auxiliary, being direct support to the insurgents, providing safe haven, transportation, logistical support, or auxiliary, people who provide indirect support with financing, transportation, identification. 170 million people in the globe. So let's break it down a little bit and look at the United States. How many Muslims do you think are in the United States? Let's take this same format and just continue to reapply it. Come on, give me a shot in the dark. It's not quite a third, but it's close. Well, throw a number. 10 million's close. It's actually 7 million. So if we take a look at that number of 7 million, and we use that chronic 5%, that means in your home alone, in the United States, there's approximately 45,000 terrorists, violent extremists. Then multiply that essentially by 3 with the network of underground and auxiliary. Now these numbers start to get really scary. So what are we talking about in Italy? Give me an idea how many Muslims you think are in Italy. Somebody. 12 million? 5? 1 million. 1 million's correct. There's approximately 800,000 declared residents of Italy that are Muslim. The remainder are undocumented, illegal immigrants. For you who live here, we're talking about between 5,000 and 15,000 insurgents in a little country like Italy. It makes you think now that the communities that you live in and the social places, social circles that you run in are not necessarily as safe as you might originally have thought they were. That's the whole purpose of anti-terrorism program, is to make you aware of the seen and the unseen. What's really interesting is over 40% of the illegal immigrants in Italy are represented by Muslims. Now, why would they represent the majority of the illegal immigration in Italy? Proximity may be one answer. Let's take a look at a few basics. One thing that absolutely cannot be escaped from any organization is funding. People and organizations have to have money to operate in some capacity, in some way, shape, or form. There's essentially two methods that insurgents use across the globe to fund their operations. One is called impasse, or mobile money, which are programs to transfer money through cell phones. It's the newest, latest, greatest, most high-tech means to be able to transfer money. It's also one of the most difficult to track because it's the newest form that's being integrated into the global financial community. Now, the opposite end of that scale is ancient and goes back to biblical times. There's a name for it. Does anybody know what it is? Take a stab. Hand carry? Not quite. The name of the system is called the Halawa system. Halawa is, in essence, it's also known as hundi, but it's an informal value system based on the performance and honor of a huge network of money brokers, primarily located in the Middle East, North Africa, the Horn of Africa. It also operates either parallel or outside of traditional banking means. Now, that's a great textbook definition, but what does it really do? The reason that insurgent groups use this is because if I'm an insurgent in Afghanistan, I know that one of the primary means of identification is through financial and communications. If monies are being transferred to me and I'm literally no one who's on the radar or someone who's high on the radar, that's a key indicator. So I want to stay off of any of the coalition, world's law enforcement, military. I want to stay off their radar. So how do I do this? If I'm in Afghanistan and my boss is in Saudi Arabia, you have these Halawa networks that are all over the world. And what they essentially are one-man banks. So a Halawa broker in Saudi Arabia, based upon the honor system, will call a Halawa banker just an individual who has access and placement to large amounts of cash. He will call Afghanistan for someone who is in the Halawa system and tell them that there is approval to transfer funds. So now there's no bank trail, there's no financial trail, there's no credit card, there's nothing that can be picked up by the CIA, NSA, DIA, NEIA, and large sums of money are being able to be provided to insurgent groups in some of the most rural places of the world. It's the Halawa system. Now, typically, within any insurgent group or terrorist cell, there's always one person who handles the money. It's almost indicative when you're dissecting any sort of information to find out what is the most key and critical Achilles heel to that organization. I'm telling you because many of you will end up back in some of these places in Africa, Iraq, Afghanistan, probably not Iraq, but most likely in Afghanistan or in the Horn of Africa. This is how business is done. And these are the things that you need to pay attention to. In our particular case, we were able to thwart several IED cells and operations targeted against the governor of Kandahar by disrupting these cells, financial cells. In November of 2006, we were able to capture a money man coming from Pakistan into Kandahar through Spin Bulldog. And by doing that and capturing the money man, we were able to disrupt not only the cell, but the operations themselves, because people want to get paid. I don't care if you're a jihadist. You got to eat your skateboard bread, right? You got to have money for Thursday night, right? That's their party night. The human nature of them, even though it's ideological or religious, they still have to be paid. You have to use money and resources to be able to buy materials. The long and short of it is that by capturing the money man, now the organization that he represents now has to replace him, his confidence, his knowledge, his trust, and it allowed us to be able to separate the network and cut off the insurgent operations for those three terror cells, or those three IED cells for 3 months. So doing the basics in any operation with simple knowledge is the key to success on the battlefield. It's not the sexy stuff you see on the movies. That's a bunch of crap. If you do the basics and you do them consistently, you're going to come out on top, whether it's a gunfight or intelligence collection, every single time. We've got to be able to use examples in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and apply them to a threat model. The first task is, if I'm a cell leader and I've got to get my people into a country, I've got to get them infiltrated. In a place like Afghanistan, you have a completely porous border with absolutely no security whatsoever. Most people simply walk across an invisible line on a map and traverse from one country to another. That's also how they move not only their personnel, but their resources. Well, let's think about Italy. What are some of the countries to the northwest? Anybody? North, northwest? You got liberal countries like Switzerland, Monaco, Morocco. It's very easy. These are high transit countries. They're not really interested in causing any trouble because the vast majority, yes, sir.
Grab that back.
Having been a young ranger myself, I typically try not to play or touch with anything that's technology-based because it's inherently in my genetic structure to break it. So that being said, okay, we talked about some of the civilized countries. Let's talk about to the east. Now that's a real interesting mix and pool of countries to the due east and northeast. Go ahead. Slovenia, Estonia, These are all country states. That's what's interesting, is these are all country states. The vast majority of them within the last 20 years have either been at war with each other or within themselves. And when you start to look at the vast Muslim population that makes up former Yugoslavia, and we don't have a Tito to tell everybody you're going to live in this village, and if you get out of line, we'll just kill you all. So it makes for a happy village when Muslims, Christians, Orthodox, everybody's living in the same village and nobody's going to get out of line. Well, these are now all the countries that border you to the north and northeast. Now we're looking at a border that is what? 85% surrounded by water. I understand and have more than my share of times been on airborne operations, and I'm sure that all the commanders and sergeant majors will tell you that's the primary means of infiltration. If you're going to come into a country, you're going to come in through a seaport. You're going to come in through a small harbor. Small unit tactics work best through small means of waterborne infiltration into populated areas. Let's talk about a country let's talk about a little event you may have heard of. Tell me about Mumbai. No. Mumbai, India. Mumbai is also Bombay. Okay, raise your hand, but tell me about it. Who came in? That's pretty close. You're 90% correct. 10 members of a group called Lashkar-e-Taliban managed to conduct what even those of us who are trained in insurgency and counterinsurgency operations would look at and consider a successful operation. Not only did they manage to infiltrate through a seaport, smuggle in their weapons, their communications, and their resources and explosives, but they managed to move into an urban populated area. They managed to set off diversion area explosions, take over one of the most predominant hotels in Asian history, and hold it for 4 days. In the process, they killed 163 people and wounded 308. 10 people did that with assault rifles and a sack full of hand grenades. The comparison here is the fact that they infiltrated through a waterborne seaport with all these materials, never got checked through immigration, blended in with the population, and were able to execute a terrorist attack within 72 hours of arriving into the operational area. Simplicity and planning. Now I know, because even though Mr. Markham is in the audience and he's the anti-terrorism officer, as a young specialist just arriving in the U.S. Army, he was my mentor, as I preferred to call him, my tour mentor, when it came to learning everything small unit tactics when I first came into the U.S. Army. Planning is everything. But how much planning do you think that they do? How much planning goes into some of these operations? I'm sorry? Years, months. Would you be surprised to know that the vast majority of the planning is done within hours? Most terrorist cells do not use massive, detailed, complex planning processes. Apparently somebody has forgotten about D-Day and LGOPs and their capabilities in Normandy during World War II. Because anybody who knows, having conducted any type of operation, that 80 to 90% of that plan goes out the window once you either exit the aircraft, the first bullet's fired, or you cross the SP. Our enemy does not bog itself down with detailed, massive planning processes. It is simplicity in planning at its greatest. What's interesting is it would behoove us as a U.S. military to take a look at, do we really expect that our enemies go through the entire MDMP process? Do we need to get the squad leader, platoon sergeant, the platoon leader, the company first sergeant, the company commander, yada, 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 all these levels of approval? No. Their processes are simple. Their leader gives them a task, and then they're required to put the plan together and execute. That's one of the reasons that they're so hard to detect. Would it surprise you to know that every member of a terror cell literally is given 2 to 3 tasks? That's it. That's how they decentralize. That's why it's so hard to detect. That's why communications are so difficult to track and monitor, because they're so it's not disorganized, they're so decentralized that everybody is given a few simple tasks. The truth is they're almost better at the planning process than we are. Maybe if we took a hard look at simplifying our planning processes, especially with small unit operations and tactics, the way our enemy does, it would allow us to be more fluid. Because as many of you know, in the theater of operations where you're dealing either with an insurgency or a counterinsurgency, flexible is too rigid. You must be fluid. Now, I guess as I understand it, every 3 years you have a higher headquarters requirement for an outside assessment. We have to be humble in what we do because the enemy is more than willing to do this. We have to be able to take the best of what everybody does around us, refine what we do in order to counter the enemy. Outside assessments are a great tool in the prevention of a terrorist attack. I will tell you that as small unit operations, outside assessments, even within your own platoon and squad, are great assessment capabilities that are available to you that you don't have to involve the chain of command in to make your element better. In 2005 at my fire base, we completed the transition and relief in place with an outgoing Special Forces team. After several weeks of preparation, we felt we had made all the appropriate changes. We then requested another Special Forces team to come in and conduct a security assessment on our own fire base. I am humbled to say that upon completion of the assessment, significant gaps in our exterior perimeter, our interior perimeter, our security posture, and our procedures were found to have had gaps. 4 months later, I was awakened in the middle of the night. I lived right across from the ops center. Multiple explosions right outside the fire base. Went into the talk. One of the towers called in and said that it had seen several explosions but couldn't see anything else. Of course, having an indigenous force without night vision capability, we had to wait until morning before we could go out and conduct a sensitive site exploitation. What we found were the remains of 2 suicide bombers. Part of their remains were entangled in concertina wire. The insurgents had the thought process and the planning and the skill set to identify defilade that could not be seen by the towers and to move up that defilade. Interestingly enough, there were 3 small ravines that ran straight to our barracks. They made it through the first set of wire, but they didn't make it through the second set of wire. The first explosion had set off the second explosion. The essence of this and the importance of this is the fact that by having an outside assessment, we had an exterior unit come in who was not tied to the plan in any way, shape, form, or fashion. That allowed them to be able to tell us what was wrong with our plan and make the corrected changes. For us, the corrected changes were taking Russian mines and putting them in the defilade where we knew the towers couldn't see. Sometimes it pays to be humble. Never underestimate the enemy's will or their capability. We have a tendency to do that. Isn't that hard to believe, Americans? We tell ourselves we're pretty humble, but go anywhere, even in the United States. We're talking about an insurgency that has no boundaries. It's not just a belief in something. Typically, we all believe in something. We believe in patriotism. We believe in freedom. We believe in our Christian beliefs. But we tend to make the mistake of placing limitations on people. Oh, they'll never do that. But that was my favorite, was hearing a commander say, oh, the enemy would never do that. It's not a good assessment, because there's nothing that you ever expect that the enemy will do. As if seeing people beheaded on the internet wasn't motivating enough to take into consideration the insurgents we fight in Afghanistan, the ones you fought in Iraq, have a level of will that is hard for us to comprehend. But we have to try to put our hands around it. My first exposure was in 2005. It just so happened that I was the lead vehicle after completing a combat operation over on the Pakistani border. I looked over to the right-hand side where there was a small bazaar. Toyota Tercel station wagon comes flying out from behind a gas station. I can see the guy screaming as he runs into the side of my unarmored Humvee. Luckily for us, for me, it was a vehicle-borne IED. And if you've ever seen what 652 millimeter artillery rounds will do as a V-bid, it's breathtaking. I believe it was divine intervention, but it just so happened that the one charge that they mounted to the trigger device was not a high explosive round, but a white phosphorus round, which then gave us great joy as we watched him slowly sizzle. The point is you have to think about how much will it takes to know that you are within seconds going to commit your own death, and understand that that is the enemy that's outside these walls. Now, does that mean there's an imminent attack going to happen in Italy? Absolutely not. But what we have to do, because we try to be prepared, is to give you the most probable course of action. what might happen and then plan for and take that seriously. Tony Blair, when he was the Prime Minister of England, stated that it is important that terrorists realize that our determination to defend ourselves, our people, and our way of life is greater than the determination to cause death and destruction to the innocent people and a desire to impose extremism upon the world. The point being, no matter where you are, what you do, you have to be able to meet or beat the will of your enemy. Only really through hope, education, proper training can we compete or defeat radical Islam with our capability. Ultimately, the price we're talking about is freedom, whether it's here in Italy, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in the United States. One thing I want you to there's several things that I want you to take away from this and remember, but no evil in the history of the world has ever disappeared on its own accord. There's a couple of points I want you to take away from this. All terrorists are not on the battlefield. They travel through Italy. If you've been through a major airport anywhere in Europe, ironically, you might have passed someone who is directly associated with terrorism. In certain cases, in certain communities, they live among you. Don't think like a Westerner when you're dealing with threats. Think like the enemy. They don't have a box. They don't have limitations. They don't have rules. It means that when you go out into public, you can still have a good time, but you have to maintain a level of situational awareness that most people do not have. Who knows what kafar means? The word is kafar. It's an Arabic, yes. Very good. That's exactly right. It's their word for non-believers. And what they have in store for non-believers is almost impossible to comprehend. Understand this. In situations where there are high threat areas, if you are not a Muslim, you will receive no quarter. If you become complacent, they will target you. If you take the same route home every single day, if you go to the same bar, you order the same foods, you do the same thing, if you set patterns, if you talk to people about what your unit's doing in public, they will target you. Anti-terrorism is a team sport. It really is. Much of it at the unit level is looking after your friends when you go into public spaces. As a civilian and as a soldier, it's about paying attention and being situationally aware, understanding your operational environment when you're not in an operational environment. You need to act as if the whole effort depends on you, because you never know when it may very well be. Observation is the key to detection, and detection is the key to prevention. If you're not paying attention, something can slip past you. And there's nothing worse than survivor's guilt. On post or off, if something doesn't seem right, trust your instinct, because it's probably not. If you see things like picture taking, videoing, groups in certain places for long periods, if you see a guy standing at a bus stop and 3 buses go by, it's not common activity. should make your spider senses on the back of your neck start to stand up. Think about the high-rise apartment buildings around this installation. They can see directly down into this installation. Do you want to really do rehearsals in an area where you can be observed by outside areas? No. So what do? You bring it up to your chain of command. If you're going to do rehearsals, if you're going to do any training, move to an area where you can't be observed from. As for information, they have no need to know. Anybody outside these walls has no need to know what you know. If you see something that doesn't make sense, report it to your iWatch. Everybody knows what the iWatch is, correct? Okay. I'm going to wrap this up. The only way to stem the tide of terrorism is for it to be a personal and organizational effort of vigilance and action to defeat a resolute enemy. This is why you have an anti-terrorism program. That's why there are additional inconvenient random anti-terrorism measures that go on a regular basis, and an ATO that insists that you execute them. Because if things become complacent, if they become common, you will be targeted. To conclude, how many of you guys have heard of a little Chinese general named Sun Tzu? If you don't have your hand up, spend less time doing something else and more time studying one of the most masterful generals that every military in the history of the world has studied. He said that if you do not know yourself and you do not know your enemy, you won't win any battles. If you know yourself but you don't know your enemy, or you know your enemy but you don't know yourself, you'll only win half your battles. But if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you'll win all of your battles. I hope some of the things that I shared with you today made sense, if anything, fairly entertaining. But the idea is, in order to remain free, you must remain vigilant. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your service. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. Even after all this time, I'm still getting told what to do.
See, this just shows that an E6 can still exert authority over a retired major now. If you haven't guessed, Rusty and I are great friends, have been for 20 years, and we just want to give a small token of our appreciation. This is the first time that we've had a no-kidding, real-world expert when it comes to things of terrorism come here. And I hope we can, obviously, we need to build on that, but I think it's a great precedent that we've set by having him come here. And so we want to show our appreciation here. Yes, and I made it, I hope, small enough you can take it home. This is actually historic in one way. This will be, I think, the first, of course, it's not like you don't have a bunch of plaques, but this will be the first plaque that does not say his rank and then Bradley at the end. This is addressed to Mr. Rusty Bradley from our garrison here. And it says, many thanks for mentoring, motivating, and educating the Vicenza military community, and ensuring the success of our Anti-Terrorism Awareness Month, August 2014. I am very grateful that you came here, Rusty. Thank you for coming, taking time to be with us.
Thank you for having me, Jesse.
There you go, bud. Here, get that on the shot. Huh? This way? Okay. We are now hamming for the camera. I mean, let's just not kid ourselves here for just a minute. One more for good measure. Just to conclude real quick, pull this off here, I can walk around a minute. The things that Rusty shared with you, and that I, beat the drum about every Thursday in our AT Level 1 awareness training is, there are really bad guys out here, okay? don't need to run around afraid of that, but we need to be vigilant. And so sometimes I am a father, obviously, and now a grandfather, okay? So I hope we don't come off as grumpy old men trying to fuss at you and run your life. That is not where we're coming from. What we are saying is that there are potential viable threats out there that could harm you and harm our mission here. There's no doubt people outside this fence that would love to come in here and do some harm. Do you believe that? They really do exist. And so my job, in a sense, is to prevent a terrorist attack. Easy, huh? We got a lot of help. We work with our police and our military intelligence and a whole ton of folks. Like the little banner out there says, anti-terrorism is a team sport. I hope you'll take the things that you learned here today. Hopefully you learned a few things. If nothing else, spread the word around the community that there is an AT program. We take it serious. We take your safety serious. We want you to come here, have a great time, tour Italy, get promoted. Never bad to get promoted. Never bad. And go home safe. Our job is to keep you safe and keep our mission safe. And that's what we try to do here. Again, thank you very much for your time, and y'all have a good day. Thanks again.